spooky nerds, and welcome to this experiment of the unexplained, this little show we are calling Talking Strange, which is part of the Den of Geek Network. I am your host, Aaron Sagers, journalist, paranormal historian. Currently, I can be seen on the Travel Channel and Discovery Plus show Paranormal Caught on Camera. But we are not here to talk about this Aaron. We're here to talk about another Aaron. And this guest, he began his podcasting career in 2015 with the launch of Lore, which is now 191 episodes strong. And that does not count the remastered episodes that they are putting out there. Of course, Lore went on to be a breakout hit globally, aside from racking up nearly 350 million downloads to date. I'm sure it's even more than that as of right this second. Lore was adapted for 2 seasons for Amazon Prime into a television show. It's also been turned into a 3-book set from Penguin Random House / Del Rey. And this gentleman has toured exclusively with Lore, talking about the storytelling experience. And he has had audiences up to tens of thousands of people all across the country. He is also the founder and president of Grim and Mild Entertainment. This guy stays busy writing, producing, voicing a number of popular shows, including the 2021 breakout hit Bridgewater, which is a great show. And it's getting a second season, which is coming out August 2022. And some of the other shows that come out of the Grim and Mild Entertainment family: Unobscured, American Shadows, Cabinet of Curiosity, Haunted Road, featuring our friend Amy Bruni, who has been on this chat with us as well. And in 2019, Aaron published his first comic book series, Wellington. Without further ado, let me bring this gentleman in, Aaron Mahnke of Lore. Aaron, welcome.
Aaron, how are you, sir?
Aaron squared. Man, I'm glad that we're finally able to have this chat. I know we've been talking for a while to make this happen, and we also interact on the social media sphere, but we are here now. How are you doing?
It was a long road to get here, but we figured it out. Yeah, I'm good.
Good.
Yeah, we're both on the East Coast. I'm in the Boston area. You're in New York, so I'm sure we're experiencing some of the same weather and cold and snow and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think you probably had a little bit more digging to do this weekend than I did. We got about 12 inches, and it's still all out there pretty much.
Yep.
Yeah.
we got about twice that, but I've got kids that just love to go out there and spend hours in the snow, and it's been good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this was not one of the questions I was going to open with, but when I see a background filled with such nerddom, including an Ecto-1, a Millennium Falcon, the Mythosaur. Well, I guess the question is, well, have you been keeping up with Book of Boba Fett? That's one question to throw at you.
I have. I enjoyed the references in that last episode, and I hope that they will lead us to what it sounds like they're leading us to.
Yeah, me too. I hope so. Like, oh man, this could be a whole separate conversation. But yeah, I am enjoying it. I am overall enjoying it, and I think that it's a slow burn and then kind of went into a whole other gear. The other thing I wanted to ask about before we get into podcasting and lore, you mentioned recently on social media your love for Back to the Future 2, specifically the last 5 minutes of it. Talk about that a little bit for me, about what you love about it, because I think we're pretty much of the same generation, so I want to hear your perspective on it.
But it's that, Back to the Future 2, that second half when he's back in 1955, he's back at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, and you're seeing the first movie from a new angle. There's something really magical about that. I really admire what they did, using 1980 special effects, lining up shots and all of that to do what they did. It was a really neat take. I know that there's the joke in Avengers Endgame about like Back to the Future is not how time travel works, but in the Back to the Future canon, that is how it works, and they play with it so well. And then those last 5 minutes, from the time he lights the sporting records book on fire in the bucket until the end of the movie, it's just so impeccably stitched together in a way that you're like, you're continuously hit with delight, and oh, that's cool, oh, now they're doing that, and it's just, I mean, I don't want to spoil it for people, but it's been out for decades. So I think at this point, if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil things. But the fact that you can watch the DeLorean disappear in the sky, and then rain starts, he turns around, and the car pulls up with a letter from Doc that was written. Like, it's, I love time travel stories. I do.
Me too. As much of a Star Wars nerd as I am, I think Back to the Future is just such a cohesive trilogy, even more so than the original Star Wars. And I know that's a bold statement, but I do love that we've already spent 2 hours or 4 hours really with these characters in this world, and then by the end of that movie, they break it. They break the what we expect, what we think is going to happen, and then we go into this whole other adventure. Yes,
Yeah.
For you, what were some of the other storytelling building blocks growing up? Like, little Aaron, what were you getting into that you now see kind of shaped what you appreciate about stories now?
Well, I mean, as a guy in my late 40s, I have this privilege of being able to say that I was 10 in 1985. Like, 1985 was, if 2020 is at the bottom of the list of years, 1985 is way up there. The music, the films, and so in a lot of ways, I was raised on those original Star Wars, the early Indiana Jones, anything Spielberg, E.T., Close Encounters, all that stuff. It just TV shows like Amazing Stories and McIver and the A-Team, like, they're cheesy now, but man, they were just so formative. So for me, I think there was that constant stream out in pop culture of then it was fresh, right? Then they were creating new paths forward with storytelling, and it was pretty transformative.
Oh yeah, and I agree. I mean, Amazing Stories, and for me, all of those, Goonies, Monster
Oh
Squad.
yeah.
Monster Squad came out a little bit later, but it was this perfect time of pop culture, and within that, there was sort of this supernatural thread that was woven through all of these things, the mysticism, the mystery. One of the things that I really got into at a young age is I was a big Twilight Zone fan early on. Obviously, that far predated the 80s, but there was that. And then the Time Life book series, the Mysteries of the Unknown, and then Unsolved Mysteries. Those were kind of the things that hooked me on the weirdness, the high strangeness pretty early on. What were your building blocks as far as, okay, beyond the Spielberg, the Lucas, what were your fantastical elements, your paranormal, your supernatural fascinations at that age?
Yeah, well, you hit on a couple of them. I mean, Unsolved Mysteries, you didn't know what you were going to get with every episode. It could be straight up true crime, missing person, but there was a really good percentage of just really unusual things that took place, and I loved that show. There was something about that end of the show where there was always that chance where he was going to come back on and he was going to say update, and then you're like, oh, I hope I remember this story because we're about to get this, the finale of it or something. The Time Life books, I grew up in a home. My mom didn't really want me to have a lot of those things, and so thankfully her mom was the librarian in town, and I would just go there and she'd help me out. But being who I am now, I've gone on eBay and tracked down the whole set and purchased it, and it's in my research closet over there, and I think I've got another like knockoff series that's similar.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that just they set a lot of who I am today in motion. But for me, the single moment, the November 12th, 1955, whatever it was a Scholastic Readers Club catalog, those color newsprint things. They're beautiful. And I remember picking up a book we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but I managed to get my parents to buy one book in there that was like weird and unusual stories that were also supposed to be true. It was like odd history, weird history kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And I remember in particular one story. It's kind of a common folk legend in the South of a farmer who, waves to his family and then steps into the field and they watch him just vanish.
Right.
And it hasn't been backed up by newspaper accounts. It's been traced back to like decades after as the first time it's been told. But it's still like the sketch that was at the beginning of that story and reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. History is full of weird things. And that was the moment right there that I just knew like I wanted to read and write about that stuff.
Well, I mean, kind of pulling those threads together for me, those Time Life books. Same. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. My family, I was the youngest of 5 kids, but my parents were definitely big supporters in us reading, and my mom would take us to a used bookstore. But the first Time Life one I picked up was about time travel. And I think they had a version of that story in that one as well, in one of the 33 books in that series, or about someone that reappears,
Yeah.
and in period clothing, seemingly decades later. So I totally love those. And it's nice to know that the Scholastic Book Fair continues to exist. It is still a thing out there.
Yeah, absolutely. My kids bring it home, and there's I don't know if it's genetic or just maybe it's in the ink. And you touch and feel them, you want to order things from them. It's compulsive.
Yeah, I love those. Well, now obviously you are working on so many projects, and we're gonna dive into lore specifically, but right now, what is a day in the life of Aaron Mahnke? Like, because I'm like, I don't know how you are physically. Maybe you have manipulated time and space, because how are you getting all this done? So what's the day in the life of you right now?
I'd like to say clones because it would just make more sense. But
Gets
a
out of
lot of
control
it
with
is
clones. You can't, that's dangerous stuff right there.
it is it is um, a lot of it is just sheer willpower. I I often liken it to jogging with a riding lawnmower behind you. And
Okay.
look, I've set up release schedules and made commitments, and I simply have to keep up my pace. Otherwise, I fall, and that riding lawnmower will cut me to pieces. Um, these days, it's more like a tractor combine kind of thing. It's big and it's vicious, but I have a lot of people around me to help me run, so that's good. So a typical day for me is get my lore responsibilities done first, because that's the engine in the plane that everybody else is riding on, and then I fit in everything else in there
Hmm.
around the cracks. It's sort of that idea of like get the big rocks in first, get the smaller rocks in after that, and then get the gravel, the sand in after that. So I sit down on a day that I write, and I'm at my desk by 6:30 in the morning. I write until about 10:30 or 11. I work out, I shower, I have lunch. I'm back in the office, and then I take care of emails, interviews, meetings with my team. Uh, Sometimes it's VO for other shows. Cabinet of Curiosities is another one of those never-ending, like it's out twice a week with 2 stories
Hmm.
every episode. So I'm recording a lot. Yeah.
And someone in the comments did say they would also like some of the big Mankey energy to finish projects. Yes, I think we all envy that a little bit. Yeah, and you mentioned it. You are still writing lore and handling most of it yourself with your researchers, but this is still your essentially. It's a little indie project, not little, but it's an indie project, right?
It is. I think I have outsourced what I feel like I can outsource. I have researchers who they will take a topic that I have. Just last week, we did our annual writers' room for lore, which is a TV concept that I've pulled into my podcast, where all of the researchers and I gather together. The last 2 years, it's been over Zoom. We all pitch ideas to each other, and we break them down into the simple structure that they will be in the episode. We say, look, we could do an episode on this. Here's what Act 1 will be about. Here's what Act 2 will be about. Here's Act 3. And then this would be a really good detail to hide for the end, for the hook at the end. And then here's an epilogue story that's sort of topic adjacent, but not essential. And if we all agree that there's material enough out there to do it, we file it. put it on the list, and then down the road, a researcher will grab that little micro outline and they run with it and give me like anywhere from a 12 to 24 page outline of material. But then after that, I take over. I have to read that outline. I have to find the theme, the thread that runs through that episode, and then sit down and write it. And I've learned over the years that it was there was a season where I wrote all my episodes, and then when it came time to publish them, I would record them the week before, mostly because that's when I got the ad copy. So I would record them with their ad copy. But sometimes it had been months since I wrote it. So nowadays I will write my introduction, stand up, go in the booth, record it, come back, write the act one, and then go in the booth and record it, and just go back and forth. And so by the time I'm done writing in one morning, I have written it and recorded it all in one morning. And then the next day I do audio production. And then Wednesday I write and record. And then Thursday I do audio production. And then Friday I just kind of cry in a corner.
And then have to shovel snow all weekend. Yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully, my plow guy gets out and shovels too. So
okay, it's good to have a Mr. Plow. The do you? I mean, as you're creating these other projects, do you ever want to set things aside and kind of hold them for yourself? Where you're like, you know what? Nah, I kind of want to do this one myself.
Sometimes the new show we launched last month, Grim and Mild Presents. This first season is called Sideshow, and it's just all about the American, what people would call the freak show, the human exhibits and things like that. And it's fascinating, and it's also simple as a podcast. It is much like Lore. It is a voiceover track and a music track. So I decided I'm just going to keep the production in-house. Something like Amy's show, because I'm partnered with iHeart, I can just say, here are files, take Amy's audio files, take all this stuff and build it. Because it's complex and I don't have the skills for like all these interview stuff. But it's a simple storytelling podcast. I'll still hold that close to the vest sometimes.
Yeah.
I do a lot of my own things. I still do my own accounting. I pay the bills. I order coffee for the office. Like I just like doing everything.
Yeah. I think maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think part of this is, do you think it's perhaps because your career really was, you were already a entrepreneur, a self-starter, somebody that owned their own business before we ever got to Lore. So some of these things were cooked in early on as a professional, and so you still know how to just run the machine on your own by and large.
Yeah, I mean, everything's compound. So back in the day when I had a job outside the house for somebody else, it was in my spare time at home on my day off that I would do design work and practice and get good at it and work with clients and build that client base to the point where I was able to go off and, 15 years ago or so, I was a freelance designer working for myself. And then you've got more time available to learn new skills. And so it's just now that you get yourself ahead. And I guess it's sort of like mountain climbing where you're always, moving your tethers and you're buying yourself more time to learn. Mm-hmm. So at this point, right now, this week I launched a YouTube channel for myself just to like teach about podcasting and writing and kind of these questions that we're talking about right now. And I've had to learn all of that, but I kind of had the luxury to learn those things because I work for myself from home, and what I have done for the last 7 years has become very easy to do for me.
Yeah.
It used to take me 4 days to write an episode, sometimes 5 days, and I can do it in a morning now. So
that is impressive.
That's changed a lot for me.
I think it was Paste Magazine a couple years ago. You said that you define lore. Lore is not a mythology and it's not modern urban legend. It's in that sweet spot between. It's more documentable history with dark undertones to it, whether it's supernatural or just sinister. Well, first off, is that still how you view the definition of lore, or has it changed, evolved?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, there's sort of a zone that I stay out of when I'm looking for topics for lore. I try to avoid stuff. This isn't exclusive, but 1960s, 1970s up till today, I try to avoid. Honestly, like if the folks are still alive, if I'm going to be talking about people that could hear me retell their story. I don't want to deal with, oh, you got this wrong, or you shouldn't be telling my story. I try to stay in the public domain and the older stuff. Plus, there's just an attraction of that Victorian era, ghost tale, or, early 1900s monster story out in the woods of Alabama. I still think that there's value in the more modern urban legends. I just don't feel like they have the same character, or the same taste as an old weird historical folktale. One of the things that happened over the years working with lore is that it started off really strong on the storytelling side of things, obviously using history and doing research, but really strong in story. When I handed the research off to other people who were better at it than me, the research just got better. And there was a phase there where I really wanted to sort of flex those research muscles and show what my team was capable of. And so we were doing things like medicinal cannibalism and parasites partnered with colonialism. And I think it got really heady, really scholastic in nature. And we've been working hard to sort of dial that back a little bit, to know that we're still doing good scholastic work, but at the end of the day, we want to tell good, thrilling stories. And so, yeah, there's that balancing act you're always doing.
Yeah. It's an interesting zone to try to find, because like my approach with the paranormal, or, anything that's kind of the mysterious element, is that I like things that have a true factual core to it. And then I like looking at the theories and the possibility. But then there's this middle ground of, well, a lot of people say that they saw that farmer in the fields waving and then disappeared, but it may be kind of difficult to actually find a true source or origin. How do you kind of suss out, for you personally and for your team, what that zone is? What's kind of documented enough, but still you're in a safe zone? You know what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to basics of just general scholarship and research, going to primary sources. If you can find firsthand accounts from people who were there and they're not separated by decades or centuries, we think that King Arthur was around 300 AD, if he was a real person at all. But the first documents about him were hundreds of years later. Things like that, to me, pushes an idea more into the myth realm than history or even folklore. So there's kind of a weighing of the heart and the feather when we sit down with these things. But I have learned over the years that there is value in telling a story that we've figured out is actually not. It's probably not true. But so many people tell the story, and the story itself represents such a powerful idea, and in that sense, a truth of its own, that sometimes it is worth telling that story, as long as we're upfront with the listener. We say either before or after. Now, we don't have much documentation to prove that this actually happened, but clearly the story illustrates a bigger idea that we can all learn from and that we can find repeated throughout history. So it's a case-by-case scenario, but we try to be flexible with it. Yeah.
Whereas you do have, like, Haunted Road approaches paranormal stories largely from a perspective of I don't want to say belief, but on the side of it existing. You and Lore, it struck me, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've never really been too concerned about selling belief. You treat the story seriously, even if you don't require people to believe it or buy into it wholeheartedly from a factual standpoint. Is that correct? And why is that a choice?
Well, a show that comes down very clearly on one side of the fence finds an audience only on that side of the fence. If I was purely skeptical, then folks who believe in unusual experiences of the paranormal and the supernatural, I don't think they would find the show entertaining. Skeptics would love it for, oh, look how he picks this apart. On the other hand, if I came down and I was purely on the belief side, I think I would leave a lot of skeptical people out in the cold, feeling like this show isn't doing hard work to question the stories people have told. So I really do try to ride that fence of, look, here is the story. To these people who told it, this was the truth for them. And we have to respect that to a degree. Does it mean it all really happened? Well, that's honestly something that we can't prove, but let's enjoy the story.
Some of these tales, even if they revolve around a person, it might be a person that is not fully formed as a character through history, through the documentation. For instance, I'm thinking like, maybe Mercy Brown. We have a lot of stories about why we talk about her, but I don't know that, maybe there is, but I don't know that there's a lot of evidence about what she was like as a personality, what that young person was like. How important is it for you when you're telling these stories to have a character, a person that is really fully formed, or are you able to allow yourself to kind of make certain assumptions about the kind of person they might be?
I mean, I think there's a degree to which we can make safe assumptions about anyone. Being human, we all have some common fears, we have some common desires, and I think that's making those little assumptions can allow us to add some texture to a character
Sure.
that maybe we didn't actually have. And sometimes we don't need that strong character spine in the story to hang things off of. I think of the Jersey Devil episode of Lore, years ago, where the character is really the string of reports of the creature. And so you don't spend a lot of time getting to know the people in the house. You spend a lot of time getting to know the story that they told of what they experienced.
Right.
And so, again, it's sort of an episode by episode. I have to weigh the options and what does the available history give me to work with, and I do my best there.
Are there stories that throughout the course of the 191 that have been published, are there stories that you think throughout Lore, or even maybe other podcasts from the Grim and Mild, that you think are especially good cautionary tales for us right now?
Well, I've always really connected to episode 12, Half Hanged, the story of Mary Webster. She's a colonial era, so mid 1600s woman in Western Massachusetts, which at the time was like living on the moon. And she's accused of witchcraft, and because she's different, because she's an outsider, her and her husband, they literally live on the outside of town. They're poor. She swears, she's outspoken, she's not very religious in a time when the town's full of a bunch of Puritans, and they accuse her of witchcraft. She's taken to court in Boston. She gets acquitted because she's clearly not a witch, and they get really upset. And so eventually they blame an illness and a town elder on her, and they hang her. And and you see kind of the worst in society playing out, and it's really easy to see that. I want to say it was like 1626, so we're talking about 4 centuries ago.
Yeah.
And say that's in the past. That's a real common attitude that a lot of people have about historical stories, is that presumption of social evolution, that we're better now than we used to be. But I feel like her story really shows that we're not. And the little kicker at the end of her tale is that, they might have hanged her out in the woods, left her for dead on the ground, but she literally like gets up the next morning and goes home and lives for like another, I don't know, 20 years or something. It's crazy. So I'm sure as a constant reminder to those people that they stepped out of line, they crossed the line. But yeah, I think that if there's a theme that's most common through 191 episodes, it's probably our treatment of outsiders, of how we handle the people who aren't like us. And that's not I don't go into it with an agenda. Yeah, as you know, you don't go into this stuff and say, I'm not a revisionist when it comes to history. I just read the story, and you have to step back and say, what is this saying? And Well, it's pretty clear that a lot of these have to do with how we treat outsiders.
And the one of the ones that comes to my mind, I know you did. I know this was one of the TV episodes, and it just happens to be a story that I am quite fascinated by. Is I believe it's Mary Cleary, the woman that was accused of by her husband
Bridget.
of being Bridget Cleary of being a
Yeah.
replaced by a fairy and then tormented, and looking at that story, it's easy to say, wow, those people were savages and uneducated and in this primitive time, except it was happening in Ireland, and not far away, Oscar Wilde was being persecuted for being a homosexual at the same time, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's even in our own time frame, and we look at other places, we're like, wow, how could they be doing that? We're
Yeah.
caught up in our own.
One of the things that I really try to do with lore is introduce the context of the story as best I can. And like we were talking a moment ago, like we can get lost in the theories and the philosophies behind things, and that's not good storytelling. But good storytelling is saying, what are the bare essential tools that the listener needs to get this at a visceral level? And so, Michael Cleary, yeah, he burned his wife in the fireplace of their house in Ireland because he thought she was a fairy. But this was a guy that I think in a matter of months had lost his father and his mother. Like, I'm trying to remember if they had miscarried recently. Like, this was a guy that I'm not making excuses for him, but
Right.
there's the context of, like, you've got desperation on one side, you have centuries of folklore on another side, and Bridget gets sick. She has a reputation as, again, she's strong, she's outspoken, she was earning more than he was, she was
Mm-hmm.
supporting the family, and all these things just sort of conspired against her. And when you have the context of a story, it really helps things come to life. The episode that came out this week it's about demon possession, and the main tale takes place in England in the 1600s. But you can only understand the conflict going on if you have a very brief break and learn about the difference between Catholics, Anglicans, and Puritans. It sounds boring. People who show up for spooky stories don't want to hear about that. But you have to understand what separates those three groups in order for the story to really hit you more fully. And that's another one of those balancing acts we have to do of, like,
Yeah.
can we just put this in? Is that enough to equip people, or do we have to give it more? I don't want to bog it down with boring history, but it's necessary.
I think so. Prior to Lore, I was a big fan of the How Stuff Works, stuff you should know, stuff they don't want you to. That series, Stuff You Missed in History Class, really great series of podcasts. And then Lore came along, and they were doing things in a very particular way. And then Lore came along, and you were doing things in a very particular way. And since then, we've had a lot of podcasts I've been involved in that are doing things in ways that are clearly inspired by what you did, what How Stuff Works did. Now we're at this point that I think it's a great thing. A lot of people are out there trying to tell stories, but now that there are so many podcasts and programming out there that have taken on similar content matter to Lore, is it at the point where it's become more of a difficult pursuit for you? Do you think there are stories that you just don't want to go into because enough of these other podcasts have now done it? Or how has the success of your show impacted how you do business now as far as selecting stories?
Well, I don't listen to other podcasts. I don't listen to other podcasts, actually. Mostly because I produce about a dozen, and my head is full all the time. Plus, when you're writing or you're recording, you can't listen to podcasts anyway, and I do a lot of that. Nobody has my research team. Nobody writes. No, you can write like me. I mean, I just write. I'm not claiming that I have a formula that's unique to me and me alone, but writing style. I mean, you could when you bump into a show that's moving into that same topic, you can smell the differences. So what? and more power to them. I think that every storyteller brings their own unique perspective to interpreting a historical tale or whatever it might be. So what reassures me is that they'll always come back to hear our interpretation of this. How are we going to tell this story? I think we waited like 6 years before we did a Bigfoot episode because, like you said, there's just so many. Like, how many Bigfoot TV shows have there been over the last 4 or 5 decades? What more could we say? So we decided, well, let's find a way for us to say it in our own way, in a very lore style, and that's how we approached it. So I don't think it makes it trickier. It just, it means that we stay focused on doing things that's true to our DNA as a company.
Right. I think it was about 2 years ago, it was announced that April 2019, it was announced that you entered into this partnership with iHeartMedia. Lore still is separated on the side, you're doing your own thing with that. But with Grim and Mild and with this partnership, what interests you about other projects out there? Are there things that you are specifically looking for that you're like, I want to bring this into this family that I've built?
Well, one thing I mentioned earlier, just the production shops. This is a company that's been making podcasts for like 15 years. They being able to work with my heroes. I mean, you mentioned stuff you missed in history class, stuff you should know, stuff they don't want you to know. They used to be called Stuff Media, How Stuff Works.
Yeah.
That's why all the shows are named that way. But Matt Fredericks from Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is one of my, lead producers. I do weekly meetings with him and Alex Williams. And Josh and Chuck are friends, and Tracy and Holly are friends. It's neat to kind of be working with my podcast heroes. But yeah, they offer, I can bring the ideas now and not have to worry about building the technical side of things. Contrary to what most people would assume, I am really bad with audio equipment. I somehow got a mic and a computer hooked up years ago that sounds good, and I do not mess with it. That laptop is recording on GarageBand from, I don't know, 2015 or something. It's just, I'll run it till it's dead, and then Lore's over because I don't know how to change anything. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And speaking of Holly from Stuff You Missed in History Class, she's also a fan of tiki cocktails and Star Wars, which really is just, I feel like she's my soul sister over there. You've also, I recall during my research, you are a big fan of Neil Gaiman. Is this correct?
I love Neil Gaiman's writing. Neil Gaiman and Stephen King they're up there as writers to admire. They're very different writers. Stephen King will spend 5 pages saying something, and Neil Gaiman can say it in a sentence. And both do it beautifully and appropriately. They're just different people, and I love both of them.
I wish this was the moment where I'd be like, well, we've got a very special guest, Neil, but he's not hanging out in my Brooklyn apartment. But
I've met Neil. He's wonderful.
He's a delight and truly someone that, he's such an inspiration for me. Well, he's a storyteller. He's now adapted. Sandman has been adapted into an audio play, really, which is incredible. And you've meanwhile worked in TV. You've worked Wellington, worked in comic books. What would be the kind of project that you would want to collaborate with Neil Gaiman on?
Oh man, I don't know that I love when he dips into the younger audience material. Like the Graveyard Book is a good example. Ocean at the End of the Lane has elements that are sort of young adult. I think it'd be fun to do something. Graveyard Book has a lot of folklore elements in it, where sort of living in a world of folklore, right. And I think that there's more to explore there. But I don't know that he needs any of my help.
Well, the Norse mythology book that he put out there, it's more strictly myth than lore, but the storytelling that he brings to that really kind of it brings that pantheon alive in a really
Yeah.
fascinating way. It's a really great book. Anything else, not that you need more tasks, but anything else that you're itching to do but you just can't get into yet?
I feel very privileged that I've had a lot of doors open over the years for this stuff. So if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I really want to, be in the world of audio fiction, knowing that Bridgewater was in the works and seeing that out in the wild.
Mhm.
I want that to live as a multi-season um, monster of the week plus ongoing plot TV show. I feel like it's got an audio cast that we could just pick up and move over to TV and put them to work. Um, and yeah, it's a space I want to do more. And I feel like I'm like 90% in the historical documentary folklore world and a little bit in fiction. I've got another fiction project in the works right now, audio, and there are more on the way after that. Obviously season 2 of Bridgewater. It's fiction's, to me, it feels full circle. Fiction's where I started.
Right.
Lore fell out of my own personal fiction projects as sort of like a byproduct. And I like coming full circle. I want to do more fiction stuff.
Were there any haunted houses? Well, not haunted houses, but what were like the urban legends, the creepy house on the block? What were the things from when you were a kid that you remember that perhaps still lives on inside of adult you that you remember from that childhood?
There weren't any haunted houses or things like that. There's a graveyard outside of town. I grew up in the Midwest, and so for me, when I think of outside of town, there's just nothing. Corn, pretty much. Central Illinois, it's just like north to south, east to west, gridded highways. Every town is about 30 minutes apart from each other. There's corn in between them all. But outside of my hometown was the cemetery that had its own, pantheon of folklore. There was a hatchet lady and a ghost train at night that if it came by while you were in the cemetery, the only road to get out was across the railroad tracks. You were then trapped for eternity and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah. I guess the final question I have for you is coming full circle to your office. When lore was a bona fide success, when you felt like, wow, okay, this is my life. What were some of the collectibles, the goodies that you allowed yourself to get to spoil yourself with? Anything that you went out and pursued?
Well, that right there, that's the big ultimate collector's Millennium Falcon Lego. It took me weeks to build it.
Yeah.
And I was very ready to buy it. I could afford it, and it felt like a reward. It felt like like a glass of scotch for my nerd soul. And so yeah, building that was great. It's on an acrylic stand I found on eBay. If anybody's ever built one of these, they own it. Go to eBay and search like the Lego set number and acrylic stand, and it kind of holds it
Yeah.
at an angle like this. And I thrown some LED lights in around the engine area, and it's fun. So that it's little things like that. It's the every now and then I treat myself. The mythosaur skull is another example of I'll treat myself.
Yeah.
But I work from home. My wife works from home. I work for myself. I don't have a lot of big needs, so I just kind of hang out and have toys around me.
I don't know how I don't know that you would have time to build that Millennium Falcon right now.
Probably not. No.
Probably not.
Or it would take me months instead. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was in the evenings. Yeah. I'd sit down
Yeah.
at the table with a glass of scotch and work on a little piece of it. It comes with 2 books, if I remember. They're monster books. In fact, it might be, they might be spiral bound. I can't remember, but yeah, it was fun.
We've talked a little bit about spirits, but what is your scotch of choice? Other kind of spirit?
I am a wuss, so I like things that are more on the sweeter side, smoother side. So anything in the space side region, Highlands, I'll do. Belvini is probably my favorite distillery. They're a Caribbean cask,
Oh
and
yeah,
their 15-year sherry cask are. It, if I spend my spending money on something nice, it's usually a nice glass of scotch or a nice bottle of scotch. And thanks to COVID, my local liquor store delivers. So for the last couple of years, I get up my app and I order scotch and it arrives.
brilliant. I love that Balvenie Caribbean cask. Love it.
Yeah.
I'm a Lagavulin guy as far as the nice peatiness, but man, that Balvenie is just on point. I do love that.
And it
Um,
has nothing to do with my show, but look up the Laphroaig Lore that they have. It is very, very good.
there are a fair amount of distilleries that have, I mean, perhaps not surprising because
Yeah.
they're so old, but so many great stories connected to them. Yeah, Laphroaig, Balvenie. Uh, I know there's multiple that have like cool ghosty lore type of tales behind them. So we'll look
Yeah.
up the Laphroaig episode for the story on that.
When the
Uh,
first season of Lore came out on Amazon, Laphroaig actually sent me a bottle of the Lore scotch just to congratulate me and make that connection with the word. It was nice of them.
that's a nice perk to have.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, I'm going to ask you to hang out backstage, but my friend, it's so great talking to you. I'm glad we could finally make this happen.
Likewise.
Just an enjoyable chat. And I hope we get to do this at some point soon. Maybe while watching some Star Wars and pouring out some Balvenie. I say we make it happen once the world returns to some sort of normalcy.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. And I will be back with you in a moment. And that, of course, was Aaron Mahnke, and a hell of a great guy and just incredibly prolific with lore. Like I said, 191 episodes out there. And check out everything else from the Grim and Mild Entertainment family: Obscured, American Shadows, Cabinet of Curiosities, Haunted Road, Wellington is comic book, and Bridgewater, which is a great scripted show. Heck of a guy. And look, that was Talking Strange with Aaron Mahnke, but we're going to be back next week. You know him from the Suicide Squad and Ant-Man and Dune. He's also the co-creator of the Dark Horse comic series Count Crowley. David Dasmalchian. I know I'm butchering that, and I practiced it, and I still butchered it. But David will be with us February 9th at 4 p.m. So, guys, thank you for joining wherever you are. Stay spooky and keep it weird.